On my last video, I mentioned something about the first page in the Beautiful Ones book, edited by Dan Piepenbring. So when I say Dan, you know who I mean. Dan has been working with Prince since late 2015, I believe the book says, and I think the first time he started hanging out with Prince and writing about the parties was in early 2016. So what I mean to say is there was plenty of contact between Prince and Dan. However, on the 17th of April, Dan wrote that Prince had never called his cell phone before, and that is an intriguing tidbit when you take into consideration everything else that happened in the investigation, especially in Moline. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because I can prove to you that there are 2 plane landings. I'll show you the facts. We'll talk about it. Why the deep cover? Why the true identity of our creator is being hidden, and why it's being revealed at this time through me. So we're going to take a look at some of that investigative work today that I put my little heart and soul into. Let's go back to Judith's testimony on April, what I believe to be the 13th. And then the other thing that I want to explain to you quickly before I show you the evidence is that KIRK Johnson's AT&T phone records had to be deciphered in UTC time. To get an accurate record of the time the calls and texts were made, I needed to subtract 5 hours from the time KIRK Johnson was believed to be in Central Time, and 4 hours from the time he was believed to be in Atlanta, Georgia. It's a really integral piece of evidence. When Judith is being interviewed by Chris Nelson, she says that she flew in from Atlanta, came into Minnesota, and checked in at the Country Inn and Suites, and that Mr. Nelson picked her up the next day between 12 and 2. Judith is asked, was that planned months in advance, weeks? And she said, no, it was the night, overnight. And she says, I spoke with him the night before, and I had no plans of going to Atlanta. And then the next morning, he said, hey, do you want to go Atlanta with me today to see my show? So since we're never shown her flight records or any accountability for what time she checked into Paisley Park, what I was thinking is that since they're trying to cover for what time KIRK was here and there, he actually had a Dassault Falcon, and that Dassault Falcon, I believe, can fly just about 6,000 miles without stopping or refueling. So it's possible that he could have picked up Judith from LA, came back into Minnesota, probably used the Bloomington airport. And then she goes on to tell us that Mr. Nelson picks her up between 12 and 2. Here she tells us she checked in at the Country Inn and Suites. So though she said she checked in at the Chanhassen Country Inn and Suites like everybody else does, because as Dan writes, it was like a de facto substation for Paisley Park, and some guy had lived there so long he broke the recumbent bike. So the Chanhassen Country Inn and Suites is the place to be. But what I mean to say is, Judith said she checked in there, but it's, again, not verified or documented. But what is sloppily documented is that Andrew Kornfeld allegedly checked into Country Inn and Suites on the morning of the 20th at 8:45. I'm saying that since they say there is no video surveillance at Country Inn and Suites, and what they did get from the bank across the street was too grainy to use, we're never shown any of these people's comings and goings. The 8:45 a.m. check-in time would fit the scenario with Judith Hill, because again, then the next time she speaks, she says it's between 12 and 2, and she's picked up by Mr. Nelson. When did you first see Prince, Mr. Nelson? She said, we got a late start that day. He picked me up at the hotel noon or 1-ish. She said maybe even later, 2. So Judith just said that Prince, Mr. Nelson, picked her up. Listen to what Kim Pratt had to say.
Prince told me when he got in the car that he had the flu and that he wasn't feeling well. And that was before they flew out, and of course he was with Judith Hill.
When you said tell us, was there somebody else in the car with you?
So, Kim Pratt, the limo driver, just told us that when Prince got in the car, she and Judith Hill were already in the car. Judith Hill said that Prince, Mr. Nelson, picked her up from the hotel somewhere between 12 and who knows when. And she says that the evening she was at the concert, that she had a bodyguard who was assisting her and got her some food from the kitchen. Now, when you listen to Renville Wellington, the mysterious Canadian bodyguard, he in fact says that he got Prince some soup on the evening of the concert. Again, they never clarify whether it was the 13th, the 14th, or even some other date that they were talking about. So when Judith's testimony said that she had food, and then Renville said that he got Prince some soup.
The only thing I brought to him on that night at the Fox Theater was soup. One was ginger, and I can't remember what the other one was.
And then, get this, Dr. Schulenberg goes on to say that when he saw Prince, that Prince said something or was ill and had attributed it to some soup that he had eaten. And he had some vomiting the night before, the night he had attributed to some soup that he had eaten. So how coincidental can it be that they're all talking about this soup that was served to Prince, but Judith Hill also says that she had food served to her that evening? So let me just say, as a 40-year follower of Prince Rogers Nelson's life and music, that was the first time I ever started to suspect Judith Hill as being one of the lookalikes. Kim Pratt and Judith Hill are two different stories about how they got to the venue. We don't know who is in fact playing Prince. But we have to backtrack here. We have to backtrack and go talk about what Kirk Johnson said he did that day, because the media makes a big deal out of the fact that Kirk Johnson went to his doctor, Dr. Schulenberg, and got Percocet the day of the 14th. Before we can bring everybody together in Atlanta, we need to discuss where they were beforehand so they can understand what happened on the multiple plane landings. The media, of course, promotes that Kirk got the Percocet in his name to maintain Prince's privacy. So we have a bottle of Percocet with Kirk Johnson's name on it from April 14th. The media promotes that Kirk called Dr. Schulenberg, and Dr. Schulenberg wrote a one-time Percocet because he has known the patient for 16 plus years, and that the patient could pick the medication up himself in person. Kirk would have allegedly picked that medication up in person and then got on the plane and left from St. Paul Airport at 2:32 p.m. Again, remember, Judith said that Kirk drove separately and met them at the airport, but we also heard Kim Pratt say she dropped him off at the airport. So it's even likely that Kirk and Judith were playing Prince lookalikes. That's why the multiple concerts. Perhaps one person played one concert and the next person the next concert. Anyway, we have to stick with the fact that the Percocet is in Kirk Johnson's name. That's relevant because the DEA paperwork from Moline shows that the hospital puts the patient's known medications to be Percocet. So that would make the patient Kirk Johnson, would it not? I think I'm getting ahead of myself. I get excited to tell the whole story and to piece it all together, but I'm also trying to go slow because it's a lot. When you investigate Kirk's phone records, you find out that he didn't call Dr. Schulenberg first on that day. On the 14th, the incoming phone records show that Dr. Schulenberg contacted Kirk first. The first incoming call is from Dr. Schulenberg to Kirk. Kirk did not make the first outgoing call on this day. And in fact, if you look up above, at 12:46 p.m., there is an outgoing call, Dr. Sarah Boo, the dentist. If you open up any People magazine, it won't say anything about Sarah Boo, the dentist, but as you can see, according to Kirk's records, he made an outgoing call to her. But the thing is, according to Sarah Boo's testimony, Kirk called her the morning of the 14th. Let's look at her testimony. According to Dr. Boo, said Kirk Johnson called her the morning of Thursday, April 14th. Since Kirk's phone records were being deciphered in UTC time, this first outgoing call to Dr. Boo, it says 12:46, but she said the morning of. So if you subtract 4 hours, then it would be 8:46 or 5 hours, depending on what time zone he was. He's calling her, but then Schulenberg is calling in thereafter. It all may sound wild and strange. Hopefully it makes sense to you. It's clear that on the morning of the 14th that Kirk Johnson was drug seeking not only from Schulenberg but also Dr. Boo, Who leaves an almost 13-minute voicemail for their dentist about a crown prep? No one. And who then coincidentally gets 15 Percocet from their doctor that they've known for 16 years thereafter? But that doctor says you have to pick those Percocet up in person. This is the thing, you guys. The plane, they say, Pilot Betchholt said the plane left at 2:32 p.m. from the airport. But the detective information shows that the Percocet prescription was filled in Bloomington, Minnesota. This prescription showed a video from the Walgreens located at 7845 Portland Avenue in the city of Bloomington. How could Kirk Johnson be in all those places at once? He couldn't. That's where I believe the bodyguard, the mysterious Renville Wellington from Canada, makes entry, because from the morning of the 14th to the afternoon when the drugs were being picked up and planes were being boarded at Minneapolis, St. Paul, and then earlier in the video I mentioned they probably used the airport in Bloomington. That airport is an airport that Josh and Hannah make reference to when they're being interviewed, probably a small private one or something. I didn't really look into that too much, but the fact that the prescription was picked up in Bloomington, Hannah and Josh mentioned the airport in Bloomington. The largest fentanyl bust in the USA was done in 2016 in Bloomington. Sean Powell, Kirk's alleged cousin, has a home address in Bloomington. And there's also a Roger P. Nelson listed in Bloomington. Bloomington is another hot spot, much like the Chanhassen Country and Suites Inn, I guess. If you've been following along this long, congratulations. It means that you're vested like I am, and I appreciate it, because I want to get the whole twisty-turny story out there so that you understand what a cockamamie story the media is trying to spin as a cover. Renville Wellington starts receiving texts, according to these phone records, about noon the day of the 14th, as does Kim Pratt. I mentioned before in one of my videos that if you inspect the telephone documentation, Kim Pratt and Renville Wellington have exactly the same phone history. Texts are at the same time, same date, everything, which again goes to show how screwy the paperwork and the investigation are. 3/4 of a gallon of fentanyl was seized from a home in Bloomington, the largest fentanyl bust in the country in 2016. Sean David Powell, 6 feet, 350 pounds, with Bloomington, Minnesota. That's probably Big Julius.
Juice in there.
What do you mean?
You know, Big Julius.
The sleazy one?
Hey, I know Big Juice is in there, girl. Y'all help me find Juice. I can't find him.
I'm still looking for him.
Hey, he's up in here somewhere. I'm finding though.